So, yan. So, as I said, in science, a force is a push or a pull. So, all forces can be categorized into only two. So, a push or a pull. Okay, so, yan. All forces have two properties, direction and size. So Newton is the unit that describes the size of a force. So, size or the magnitude of a force. Okay? So, let's continue. Okay, so next. Okay, so here, if you look at this illustration, so the man is sitting on a chair, so, or the student is pushing down on the chair, since na umupo siya, but the chair does not move. Okay? So tandaan nyo, if there is no movement, so that means there is a balance force. So if there is no change in motion, that means there is a balance force. Okay, so the floor is also balancing the force by pushing on the chair. So dalawa. Okay, so yung number one, student sitting on the chair just because of gravity. However, the floor will also act a force on the chair to balance the force of the gravity. Okay, so yan. So, sa una, medyo malilito pa kayo. So, bakit kaya ganun? Bakit kaya may force na pataas? But later, malalaman nyo rin kung bakit. Okay? So, next. Okay, so, more than one force acts on an object. Okay, so as I said, more than one force. Okay, so, when all forces acting on an object are added, pag pinagsama-sama, so you determine the net force. So ito na yung sinasabi kong net force. Okay? Net force on the object. So net force is also called class as resultant force. So dalawang term yan ha. Net force or resultant force. Okay? So an object with a net force more than 0. So that means 1, 2, 3, 4 hanggang infinity. So more than 0 Newton on it, it will change the state of motion. So sabi ko nga, pag sinabing motion, so a change from an object's position. But when we speak of state of motion, so that means whether a particular object moves or whether a particular object stops or whether a particular object speeds up or whether a particular object slows down. Okay, so yun yung mga change in motion. Pwedeng, yung mga change in state of motion can be from rest to movement. Okay, so it moves. So from movement to rest, so it stops. Or from movement to speeding up, so nag-accelerate, so it speeds up. Or nagmo-move siya tas bumagal, so it slows down. Okay, so yung apat na yon, yun yung mga state of motion. Okay, so kapag more than 0 Newton yung resultant force or net force, so that means merong change ng motion sa object, state ng motion sa object. Okay, so bumagal, bumilis, huminto, tapos nag-move. Okay, so yun. So yun yung apat na state of motion na sinasabi ko. A change in state of motion. Okay? So next. So that's how you combine. So in order for you to combine forces, you must add, okay, individual forces together. So yun sinasabi ko kanina ng individual forces. So in order for you to determine the net force or the resultant force.
Sir, okay na po.
Okay, so thank you. Next. Okay, so I want you to look at this illustration. Okay, so these are actually forces. lang forces in the same direction. So, tingnan nyo So, I want you to look at the object. Ano ba yung dalawang objects? Okay, so ano yung dalawang objects na present dito sa illustration? So, sabi ko nga, in order for a force to exist, there must be an interaction of two objects. Okay, so the first one, an object na nag-a-apply ng force. So, the second one, yung object na nagre-react sa application ng force. Okay, so dalawang object. So, yung dalawang object na nandito, the first object is yung piano. So, I don't know what you call this. Basta piano yung tawag ko dito. So, piano, parang set. Okay, so, yung another object, yung dalawang tao. Okay, so, yun. So, tignan nyo, ito yung size ng force ng babae. Okay, so 25 Newton, yung lalaki naman 20 Newton. Okay, so tanda na, dalawa yung properties ng force. It must have the size or the magnitude, and it must have the direction. Okay, so yung nasa taas, 25 Newton and 20 Newton, that is the size or the magnitude of the force. Pero if you look at the arrow, that represents the direction of the force. So that means, if this goes to right, so that is the direction of the force. So the direction of the force of this girl is 25 Newton going right. Okay? So if this goes to right, so that means the girl is what? Pushing or pulling? Jazil.
Ano po, sir?
Okay, so what is the category of the force of this girl? Pushing or pulling?
Pushing po.
Okay, so pushing. So what about the boy? Pushing or pulling?
Pulling po.
Okay, pulling because the direction moves right. So hinihila niya. Okay, so as I said, the greater the magnitude of the force, the greater the size or the number of the force, for example, 25 Newton as compared to 20 Newton, so the higher the magnitude of the force. So mas malakas dito. Which one has greater force? Is it the girl or the boy? Giselle. Sino yung mas malakas sa dalawa? The girl or the boy?
The girl.
Ano po, sir?
Sino yung mas malakas sa kanila? Sino yung mas malakas na force na ina-apply? Yung girl or boy?
Sir, yung girl?
Bakit parang hindi ka sigurado? If you answer, make sure that you are confident. Alin yung mas malakas dito sa dalawa? Yung girl or?
Yung girl po.
Yung girl. So why the girl?
Sir, kasi mas mataas po yung
Yung? Alin ang mas mataas?
Mas mataas po yung Newton nung nung girl.
Okay, so mas mataas yung Newton or yung magnitude ng force ng girl. Okay, so thank you. Okay, so medyo maingay dyan sa inyo So pakisabihan na lang yung parent. Okay, so next. Okay, so when forces class are applied in the same direction. So tingnan nyo kasi it's going right. It's the same in direction. They must be added up to determine the size of the net force. So tandaan nyo magkaiba yung individual force sa resultant force or net force. Dalawa yan resultant force or net force and the individual forces. So yung individual forces that I am pertaining here, yung individual force ng babae, individual force ng lalaki. Okay? So, how are we going to determine the net force? So, in order for us to get the net force, especially if the forces are in the same direction, they must be added. Okay, so here in this case, so 25 Newton plus 20 Newton. So therefore, the net force or the resultant force will be 45 Newton. So what will be the direction? So the object. So yung direction na sinasabi dito, yung yung direction ng mahabang arrow, ito na yung direction ng object na hinihila at tinutulak ng dalawang tao. Okay, so this is the direction of the object. So it goes to right. Okay? So yan. So mas mahaba yung arrow, so that means mas mabilis yung pag-move ng object. Okay? So mas mabigat yung yung magnitude. Okay, so madali lang. Okay, so what about if etong dalawa nag-aaway? So supposed to be tug of war. So hinihila ng isa, hinihila ng isa. So are they classified as forces, individual forces in the same direction? Yes or no, Samantha? What if yung dalawang magkapatid, for example, naghihilahan sa piano? Are the individual forces of a girl and a boy in the same direction? Samantha?
Ano po, sir? Choppy po kasi.
Okay, so what if the individual forces of a girl and a boy are of, halimbawa, nag-aaway sila, hinihila ng lalaki, hinihila din ng babae, they are pulling. So, are the individual forces of a girl and a boy still in the same direction? Yes or no?
No po, sir.
No. Okay, so they are what? If no.
In the opposite direction,
Okay,
sir.
so very good. So they are in the opposite direction. So let's see. Okay, so let's have an example of the forces in opposite direction. So ang example nun, yung sa tug of war. Okay, so tingnan nyo yung aso. Sino dito yung mga dog lover? Wala kayong mga dog sa bahay, mga pet na dog? Wala?
Sir, tatlo.
Okay, so Raymond, meron. Alam niyo ba kung anong breed do ng aso?
Sir, namatay po, sir.
Namatay. Okay, so I'm not very particular sa mga breed ng aso, but let's call it a dog. Okay, so dog na lang. Okay, so yung object, yung isa, it's pulling the rope towards the left, and that is the dog. Okay, so yung isa naman, I don't think so if this is a wolf. Okay, but let's categorize it as a wolf for the sake of this discussion. Okay, so a dog and a wolf, nagtatag of war sila, nag-aaway. So, hinihila nila yung rope on the opposite direction. So, take a look at the illustration. So, yung dog has the magnitude of 10 Newton or has the force of 10 Newton. The wolf has the magnitude of 12 Newton or has the force of 12 Newton. Okay? So, how are we going to get the net force of the individual forces in opposite or different direction? Okay, so when two forces act in opposite direction, you subtract the smaller force. So in this case, yung pinaka-small force or smaller force yung sa dog, which is 10 Newton. From the larger force, which comes from the wolf, na merong 12 Newton to determine the net force. So madali lang ha, it's a simple mathematics. So 12 larger minus 10 smaller. So the net force will only be 2 Newton. Okay? So the net force will be in the same direction as the larger force. Kung sino yung mas malaking force, so in this case, the wolf, it's going right. So the net force will be going right. Okay, nakukuha nyo? So yung arrow dito, maikli na lang kasi parang tinabas lang siya. Okay, so tinabas lang siya dun sa mahaba. Okay? So, yun. So, 12 Newton minus 10 Newton, so is equal to 2 Newtons. Okay, it goes right because the larger force is going right. Okay, so yung object dito is the rope. Okay, so therefore, the rope will move 2 Newtons to the right. Okay, so are you getting what I mean with this? So the rope
Opo.
will move 2 Newtons to the right. Okay, so that's how you add individual forces. So parang si Jaila nagbe-breakfast pa lang ah. Okay, so yan. Okay, so next. Okay, so sabi ko baga, meron tayong tinatawag na types of, we have two. We have balanced and unbalanced forces. So ito yung yung form ng force. Okay? So when the forces on an object produce a net force of 0 Newton. So, halimbawa, yung net force or yung resultant force is 0, hindi 2, hindi 3, hindi negative, something like that. So, the forces are said to be balanced. Okay? So, the forces are said to be balanced. So, how do we actually mean by the word balanced force? Okay? So, when we speak of balanced force class, so that means there will be no change in the state of motion of an object. Okay, no change. Okay? So ito yung sinasabi ko kanina mga state of motion. So kung at rest yung object, so it will remain at rest. Okay? So walang speeding up, walang slowing down. So it will only be at rest. Okay? So yan. So in this case, yung sa wolf and yung the dog, if yung forces nila are 10 Newton and 10 Newton, so 10 minus 10, that will result to 0 Newton, di ba? So that means the rope will not move because they are of equal amount of forces acting on the rope. Okay, so if the net force is 0, so the rope will not move in its position. So parang steady lang silang dalawa. Okay? So nakukuha ba ako?
Opo.
Okay, so very good. So if balance force, if the forces or individual forces are balanced, there will be no change in state of motion. If it's initially at rest, that will remain at rest. If it's constantly moving, pag sinabing constantly moving or uniformly moving object, so hindi sila bumabagal, hindi sila bumibilis. So when you were in grade 7, you were actually informed about the speed, okay? So there will be no change in speed. If the speed of a ball is 2 meters per second, so kapag balance force, so that will remain at the speed of 2 meters per second, okay? So here in this example, the forces on the books are said to be balanced because the table pushes upward on the book and the gravity pulls downward on the book. So gravity, yan yung individual force and yung normal force that pushes upward on the book. So if there will be no change in the physics book, so that means individual forces, the normal force and the gravity are said to be balanced. Okay? So, yun. So, what about the forces on the persons? Okay, so the forces on the person are balanced. Okay, so because the floor pushes the boy upward, that is the normal force, that is the individual force, and the gravity pulls the boy downward. So, that is the another individual force. So, if the boy doesn't move, so therefore, that is said to be balanced. Okay? So, next. Okay, so when the net force on an object is not 0, okay, so that is the opposite of balanced force. So, that is unbalanced force. Okay? So, unbalanced forces produce a change in state of motion or change in motion of an object. So, ito na yung sinasabi ko. Pwedeng from rest to movement, pwedeng from movement or from moving object to rest, or pwedeng mag-slow down, or pwedeng mag-speed up. So, that is, those are examples of a change in the state of motion of an object. Okay? So, tingnan nyo, the forces acting on the physics books are not balanced because ang balance lang dito, yung table pushes upward due to normal force, gravity pulls downward due to gravitational pull, And tignan nyo, the friction between table surfaces exerts leftward force upon the rightward moving book. For example, tinulak yung physics book. Okay, so that is not balanced because the physics book moves from rest to left, going left. Okay, so yan. Next. Okay, so it's just a meme. So unbalanced force can result in movement of objects. So that's right. Okay, so unbalanced forces can result in movement of object. Okay, so not actually movement kasi a moving object can be stopped. So change in state of motion. Okay, so yung friction, so we'll tackle that next. Ano na lang. Okay, so let me stop this for a while. So you have question so far as of this time?
Wala naman po, sir.
Wala kayong question, so
Ano po?
so that's
Lan
good.
po.
Okay, so I'm going to send you another link. Okay, so another link para panoorin nyo. Okay? So, wait lang.
So now let's say a person softly kicks the ball. What happens then? Yes, the position of the ball changes. Why did the position change? It's because there was another magnitude of force acting on it, and this time the forces were not balanced. The ball moved and there was displacement. But hold on. Why did the ball stop moving after covering 15 meters? The ball started moving at a pace and then slowly came to a halt. If there's no force from the other side to stop it, how did it stop? Was there a force which stopped it? Yes, it was friction that stopped the ball.
So friction. So tandaan
Assume
nyo,
your screen to be a frame of reference.